Welcome back and welcome to our final keynote address of this Philanthropy Summit 2017. Danny Sriskandarajah was born in Sri Lanka. He has Australian citizenship. He lives in London and his office is in Johannesburg. So I would be slightly confused if I was Danny, I suspect. But since 2013, Danny has been the Secretary General of CIVICUS, which is based in Johannesburg, and it's a global civil society alliance dedicated to strengthening citizen action and civil society throughout the world. And in his role as Secretary General, Danny regularly represents civil society at international meetings, quite low-profile occasions such as the UN General Assembly in New York and the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. This afternoon, Danny is going to speak with us on the topic, Go Brave or Go Home, philanthropy's role in transforming the world. And Danny has told me he's a bit of a wanderer and he roams and prowls around the stage. And last week at a presentation in London, in a concentration lapse, he fell off the stage. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I don't think there'll be a repeat, but it'll be interesting to see. It'll be very entertaining, I'd imagine. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Danny Sriskandarajah.
It's really good to be here. I want to make it very, very clear that I am not from Invercargill. Although it's only by an accident, really, that I'm not a Kiwi. 40 years ago, almost this month, my mother left me as a 14-month-old child in Sri Lanka and came on a scholarship to study at Lincoln College. She was supposed to do her PhD there, and I know it's Mother's Day in a couple of days' time, and I should pay tribute to my mother, who left me, only saw me once for the following 5 years because she was pursuing a PhD and she wanted to commit to her own development. And as a little kid growing up with my grandparents, I knew no different. But my mother said that she couldn't, for the first few months here, see a child and not cry. And so, unfortunately for New Zealand, fortunately for Australia, my father also got a scholarship at the same time to go to Sydney. And they decided that maybe it'd be better for them to be in one place. And they said, Sydney, Lincoln, Sydney, Lincoln, Sydney, Lincoln. And I suppose Robert Muldoon would have said that the IQs of both countries did improve, and my mother left for New Zealand and went to Sydney, and that's why I ended up growing up in the lucky country, the luckiest country, of course, or a banana republic, as Paul Keating might have called it if he saw the state of politics in Australia these days. But anyway, that's another matter. It's really good to be here talking to you all about philanthropy, particularly because, as several people have said, as Akaya reminded us so wonderfully just a few minutes ago, this is a special place, and this is, according to every statistic and report that I've seen, one of the best places to live, but it's also one of the best places to support the sorts of things that we in philanthropy are interested in. The World Giving Survey, for example, ranks New Zealand this year as the 4th most generous place in terms of volunteering and donation and helping strangers. Of course, Australia ranks 3rd. So it's only right. But it's good to be here to talk about philanthropy. It's something that I sort of dabble in and never really thought of myself as a philanthropist, but I now happen to sit on the boards of 2 large philanthropies, the Baring Foundation in the UK and an organisation called Comic Relief, which disperses, I suppose, in New Zealand dollars, $200 million a year. And in those experiences, I've started to learn about the challenges of philanthropy. I thought naively that giving away other people's money would be easy. Turns out it's not. And it's really not if you start to think about the big, big challenges that face the world today: climate change, inequality, insecurity, political marginalization. Someone last night called about the orgasm of challenges that we face today in the world. It was another Australian who said that. And you think about all of those problems, and you think about our role as those of people interested in philanthropy. And today, I want to talk to you about going brave or going home. Although when Yvonne and I decided on that topic, I hadn't realized most people would have already gone home. Well, So you're here, which means you're going to go brave. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking a bit about the experience of and insights gained from my day job. As John says, I work at CIVICUS, which is a global alliance, a peak body, if you will, for civil society. We're a membership-based organization. We've got members in 180 countries now, often platforms or associations of NGOs, but also individual NGOs, but importantly, individual activists as well, who are part of our alliance. And in some ways, putting my professional hat on, I work for an alliance that represents the consumers of philanthropy, civil society, organizations and individuals who are often the recipients of support from philanthropic organizations. And we've been doing a lot of work recently trying to understand the state of resourcing for civil society. In fact, in 2015, we dedicated our annual report, which is called State of Civil Society Report, on this very question of civil society resourcing. And we had hundreds and hundreds of pages devoted to trends, analysis, views around how best we can support a diverse, resilient, and robust civil society all around the world. If you want to read any of that, all of it's free, available online at civicus.org, CIVICUS.org. And in the process of doing that report, we also came up with this idea of creating a Brave Philanthropy Award. And it's because many of our contributors to this research, to this report, said, well, actually one of the problems in the world is the philanthropic sector itself, especially private philanthropy, who you'd expect to be at the cutting edge, at the vanguard of social change, are not being brave enough. That was what I was being told by our members. And so we decided to name and fame and create a bravery award in philanthropy, and in fact add it to, for 10 years or so, we've been giving away the Nelson Mandela Graça Machel Awards for Innovation. Graça Machel, Madiba's widow, was on our board, and she and Madiba 10 years ago allowed us to use their names for this amazing series of awards, which we'd focused hitherto on civil society activists, but we've added a category for brave philanthropy. But in the process of that, I started to think with colleagues, well, what does bravery mean? If we're going to award a fantastic high-profile award on brave philanthropy, well, what does that mean? And I want to share with you 5 versions of bravery. And I hope as you go home, you think about which of those, or maybe others, you might live up to or put into your own practice in terms of doing philanthropy better, to respond to those challenges, those orgasm of challenges that we're facing around the world. So, what does bravery mean in philanthropy? The first is around defending civic freedoms. We're a global alliance, and we do a lot of research looking at conditions for civil society around the world. And when I first started this job, I thought, it's the 21st century. We've had the Universal Declaration on Human Rights that have protected our fundamental civic freedoms for decades. Sweet. Well, turns out it's not so sweet. Our research, and again, if you want to look up any of this, look up the CIVICUS Monitor, which is an online resource looking at civic freedoms in 195 countries, suggests things are getting bad, dramatically worse, all around the world when it comes to these fundamental freedoms that should underpin our rights as citizens anywhere in the world to organize, to mobilize, to speak out, to take action. Something like 110 countries last year, we recorded a serious threat to one or more of those civic freedoms, to assemble, to associate, to express ourselves. And 2/3 of the people on the planet live in a country that we think civic space is closed or repressed. And only 3% of people live in a country where we think things are open. 26 countries around the world are classified on our CIVICUS Monitor as open. I'm happy to say New Zealand is one of those. Unfortunately, Australia is actually on the narrowed category, the second category. But here too, in my last 48 hours, I've heard some worrying signs about those fundamentals that you might take for granted around our ability to organize, mobilize, even here in the best of environments, are starting to be chipped away at. Politicians who, for example, start to question our right to hold them to account, who start to question our right even to protest or to speak out. Marianne, where are you? Marianne from Action Station? She's gone. She's gone home. She's already brave, though, so she's fine. I hear that one of your someone in Parliament just this week called Action Station. Someone tell me the phrase, please. What was it? It was beautiful. A left-wing organization who are serial protesters trying to question thugs, liberal thugs. Wonderful, beautiful. But here we are in a very mature democracy with the best of conditions in relative terms, and we have someone not, questioning what they're saying, but almost starting to undermine why their right to say it. And this is not an isolated example. It's happening all around the world. It's happening in the UK, where I now live, where a government minister said just recently, or there was a directive from Cabinet Office that said, if you happen to take money from government sources as an NGO, you're not allowed to engage in the policy-making process. It was fine for charities to do good causes, but not engage in the political process, which goes against this fundamental principle of civic freedoms, but also is stupid policy-making, because who better to talk about the issues facing homeless people than the charities who are at the coalface of dealing with homelessness? And so I could go on with countless examples of how civic space is deteriorating all around the world, and we have a collective responsibility to stand up. But let me ask you one thing, those of you who are in philanthropy, particularly private philanthropy. When you heard about the attack on Action Station, did any of you think about what you and your organization are going to be doing to respond to that? Because I think bravery involves standing up in solidarity together to defend our space. And that private philanthropists, especially, but all philanthropists, cannot afford to sit back and say that's their problem over there. We're not going to, doesn't affect one of our grantees. Oh, but we're in philanthropy. We can't afford to damage our reputation. Because the moment we start to do that is the moment we've lost this struggle on civic space. And so all of us, especially those of us who have resources, who have power, who have influence, have a responsibility to stand up on civic freedoms. Our next report, our State of Civil Society report, looks at the theme of business and civil society. And it opens with a section that looks at civic space and the responsibility of businesses, progressive ones, enlightened ones, the sort of businesses we've heard from over the last couple of days who've got philanthropic arms. But yet, there are very few examples that we can find of businesses that are living up to their own promises and rhetoric and standing up and defending the rights of citizens to organize. And so there's a business case for civic space. So whether you're in private philanthropy, business, all of us who believe in these things need to stand up for those rights. A second version of bravery in philanthropy, I think, involves standing up for voice, supporting advocacy, lobbying, the political engagement, not falling into this trap, an easy trap, of saying charity, good causes, lobbying and advocacy and all that stuff, politics. That was nonsense. In fact, I think one of the problems that we've created for ourselves is to compartmentalize charities through regulations, hundreds of years worth of regulatory frameworks that has put us all in this box that's about delivering good causes, but forgetting that actually we're tinkering at the edges, we're coming up with band-aid solutions, and that it's no point in delivering shelter services for victims of gender-based violence if you're not challenging the social norms that are driving gender-based violence, if you're not challenging the policy environment that's protecting those perpetrators of gender-based violence. And so those of us who are in civil society who think that we can somehow only support the service delivery and forget about the advocacy, the campaigning, the political edge of what we're doing, we've also lost. And so for me, brave philanthropy might well involve a focus on results and delivery, but it cannot lose sight of the ultimate goal of transformation. And I think particularly those of us who work in the international development sector, but elsewhere in civil society, have let the science of delivery kill the art of transformation. We are here because we want to transform our societies, and supporting and backing those people who are brave enough to do the advocacy, to push for change, to challenge social norms, has to be part and parcel of what we stand for. A third aspect of bravery is about diversity. And there are two elements to supporting diversity that I think brave philanthropists should do more about. One is diversity of the sector itself. The sorts of funding models that we've created over the last few decades have, I think, built a very imbalanced civil society. If you look at the landscape of civil society formations, NGOs, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, then we've created a very sophisticated system that seems to be good at channeling resources to a few organizations who are good enough to write those grant applications, who know how to play the game, do the dance that we do with our grantees. But the vast majority of organizations and formations don't have access. And if you look at the statistics that try to understand the size and shape of civil society organizations, we're heading in the wrong direction. There's been substantial growth of some NGOs in most countries in the world at the cost, I would say, of diversity. You know, we have multi-billion-dollar turnover NGOs around the world. And you think, okay, that's fine, that's great, because that allows those of us in civil society to deliver at scale, to respond anywhere in the world quickly. But if you happen to live in the fourth most generous country in the world, and you think actually the resources that are available for civil society are unlikely to get much bigger, i.e. we're competing for a limited pool of resources that is not going to get much bigger, then size and scale has negative implications for diversity. And it's particularly bad because some of those NGOs are behaving in some ways like no different from the worst of corporate behaviors that we're seeing. You know, I think I've said this story a couple of times already this week. I met a chief executive of an NGO in the UK recently, and I said to him, who works in children's rights, what's your ambition for the next 5 years? And I thought he'd say, I want to end child poverty, fight for children's rights. He said, we're number 6 at the moment. We want to be in the top 3 over the next 5 years. And philanthropists have some responsibility to bear for that situation, because we funded for results. We funded for impact, we say, but we haven't funded for diversity. We haven't checked whether the sorts of resources that we're giving are building the diverse and resilient civil society that we want to build. Because diversity is an essential and beautiful part of civil society, and we can't afford to kill it by picking a few winners and saying, you go and get on with it. A second part of diversity, I think, that we talked about, I think, honestly and wonderfully yesterday in the session about putting women at center, is around walking the walk within civil society. I don't think we've really made much progress about living up to values of diversity and inclusion in our own sector. We haven't really talked enough about male privilege or about white privilege, about the discrimination that happens within our own civil society. And brave philanthropy needs to think about that. Needs to think about what are you doing in your own organizations to make sure that you're as diverse as you need to be legitimate actors in the societies and communities that you serve. Are your boards as diverse as they should be? Are your practices as diverse as they should be, or as inclusive as they should be? Are your beneficiaries or grantees compelled or obliged to have the best world-class diversity and inclusion practices, or do you actually turn a blind eye to what they're doing? So if we're serious about diversity in the sector, we have to think about the landscape, about power within the sector, but we also have to think about power and dynamics within our own organizations. And only when we walk that walk that can we start to be taken seriously. So the next 2 braveries are going to get even more sensitive, right? So ready? The next bit of bravery is to recognize what Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, one of the biggest private foundations in the world, calls the tyranny of donors. Here's what he had to say when he wrote for our State of Civil Society report on resourcing that I was talking about. He contributed a chapter. And he says, philanthropists are stuck, Mark talked about it earlier, stuck in transactional short-termism, a tyranny of donors that distorts rather than unleashes the potential of civil society. We, philanthropists, see if you recognize any of this. We're unwilling to take responsibility for the ecosystem that we've created. We demand control. We want credit. And we seem not to trust the very organizations that we support. Read his essays, How Can We Help You? It's a wonderful short essay that talks about the tyranny of donors. And I think progressive philanthropists who want to change the world, need to think hard about whether they're falling into any of those easy traps. Are you trying to projectize the world? Are you trying to fit the social change you want to achieve in some nasty log frame that kills the spark of social change? Are you focusing on, are you creating unexpected implications of your grant-making process? My favorite example, which unfortunately came from an organization I'm involved in, was the head of grants came to me and said, wonderful, we've had a wonderful response to our latest call for applications. And it was a call for applications for 10 grants that were going to go out. It was a global call. And these 10 grants, he said, we had 900 applications. And they were going to put it in their metrics, and actually in our organization's dashboard, which is how many applications do we get for our grants. So I said, 900 applications. How many hours roughly would it take to fill out each application for a grantee or a prospective applicant? She said, 5 hours. 900 times 5 is 4,500. How much does the salary cost of the person who spent those 5 hours filling out that form? $20 an hour? We're up to $90,000 worth of effort put into writing applications. Turns out those 10 grants were just under that total amount. So the amount of money being given out by this particular organization doesn't even total the amount of contribution, the subsidy that the grantee is making to the grant maker. And yet we love our forms in philanthropy. We think we should make them really complicated and comprehensive, because that's only when we're going to find out if we trust an organization well enough, if we've done our due diligence and got our audit checks in place, because we really can't trust those organizations that we're going to support. And of course, Katie Love talked yesterday about the fact that you can't put the precipitation genie back in the bottle. That's what she said, right? It's been raining all week here in... We can't put the participation genie back in the bottle. And I think there is a clear direction of travel, and if you're in philanthropy and you want to challenge the tyranny of donors, there's only one direction you can head. There's no going back, and the question is, are you going to be left behind? And it's the journey of participation, of putting power back into the hands of the people you're claiming to be helping. Never thinking as a board of trustees, we know what this community really wants. Never thinking, we'll set a program and according to these lines, and let lots and lots of people decide, apply, and then we'll have a fantastic grants committee of really eminent people, none of whom probably come from the communities that we're supporting, to decide which one of these is the best. That ship has sailed, and you have to decide if you're on it. And there are some wonderful examples that Katie's given, but you don't need to look far if you want inspiration for how you can do your own grant making in a much better way. And then let me conclude by the fifth and perhaps most challenging aspect of bravery that we need to think about. But I'm going to get a drink of water first. If you really want to be brave, then you need to dream big. And my worry of having hung out with a bunch of philanthropists over the last few years, sitting within these organizations, is we've lost the ability to dream big. We focused on the small challenges that we think we can resolve. We've looked in our communities and said, oh yeah, there's an issue that we can make a difference with when it comes to, we've got a budget, it's only a small one, we've only got this geographical range that we want to cover, so therefore our ambition, our vision, as Akaya reminded us, is to solve this issue here at this time through these time-limited means. And if we keep doing that, all we'll achieve is incremental change. Our trade as a community, it seems to me, is incremental change. And we have developed wonderful mechanisms for judging ourselves, often patting ourselves on the back, for the incremental change that we've managed to achieve. But if you look out there in the world, we all know how pressing and massive and interrelated the challenges that we face are. Feminists have reminded us for decades to think intersectionally, but we'd think in projects. We know that issues of climate change, inequality, insecurity, political disenfranchisement, the rise of populism are all deeply related. And yet, the mechanisms that we've developed to address those are, I think, insufficient and piecemeal. And so if we want to dream big, we have to think about system change. And we have to think about how do we achieve system change. Perhaps it's thinking again about the diversity of your sector. Someone told me wonderfully that there are hundreds of members of Philanthropy New Zealand. Is that right? That's great for you. It's probably pretty shitty for your applicants, because it means there's hundreds of of forms to fill, of websites to understand, lunches to buy if you're allowed to buy lunch. And it also means that you've probably got 400 different strategies for how you're going to make New Zealand a place that's blue, green, and flourishing. But perhaps you need to think about, how do you pool your resources? How do you leverage each other's influence? How do you think about those big challenges? Are you creating enough spaces to allow yourselves together to dream big? Are you putting in place programs that even have a chance of supporting those of us in civil society who are dreaming big, who dare to challenge the system, who want to be working on the big picture issues? And so there are lots and lots of things that you could be doing. I don't know each of those, but I simply urge you that if you really want to be brave, the starting point has to be the dream, your vision, and thinking through what that is, and checking it against the problems that we face. And one of those elements, just one of those elements of dreaming big for me, is where I want to leave you, which is around the work that I do in my day job when I'm not trying to give out grants or curbing the enthusiasm of the grants officer who said they've got 900 applicants, is actually around citizen action, around civil society. The most inspiring thing about my job is that I get to meet wonderful citizen activists, people who are trying to change their own communities, change the world. And the dream that I have is that the 21st century is the century of the citizen. And I say that because my reading of world history goes something like this in very simplistic terms. For thousands and thousands of years, we as human beings thought of ourselves as subjects. The queen, the king, the chief ruled over us, and we didn't have much freedom, and we were in servitude in some way or other to others in our society. And then along came these wonderful revolutions, two of them really important. One we call democracy, the other we call capitalism. And these two revolutions happened almost at the same time in many parts of Europe, and they created a system where we thought, we're emancipated politically because we've built ourselves democratic systems. And then we created a system of economic transformation based on what we call capitalism. And there's been some wonderful and happy products of those two revolutions over the last few hundred years. We're all much, much better off, especially in places like this. We all have some form of voice and participation in our society. But my fear is we have to urgently change those two systems and much more beyond. If you think about what's happening around the world with Trump, with Brexit, with Duterte in the Philippines, with Modi in India, I could go on. The common thread is disillusionment with the political mechanisms and institutions that we've built over the last few hundred years. The idea that somehow voting every few years for political parties that are so focused grouped that they're sort of indistinguishable from each other is what most people seem to be fed up with. And they're expressing things at the moment by saying, well, we hate mainstream politics, so we're going to go to anyone who offers us something of an alternative. The answer, I think, for us, if we believe in progressive values and progressive change, has to be about creating new mechanisms that put citizens at the heart of riding into a new participation revolution in which we create a more fluid democracy, a more liquid democracy, a more everyday democracy that empowers us, each of us, especially those of us who lack voice and influence in today's societies. And that's about creating a whole new way of thinking about citizen action, of participation. And of course, when it comes to capitalism, we all know where that's heading, right? We've raped and pillaged our planet. We've built vulgar levels of inequality. 8 men today own more wealth than half of the world's population put together. Some of those men happen to be philanthropists, and we celebrate them, but let me not get into that. But how have we built a system where it's acceptable to have that degree of inequality? How can we live with a system that we know is going to further drive that inequality, that even here in this country, you're starting to see inequality rise? You're one of the most equal countries on the planet, but yet, slowly but surely, the institutions, the insecurity, the automation, the greed, all of these drivers are starting to create the groundswell of inequality and insecurity. And if you want to dream big, we have to think about what comes next. We've been subjects. We are consumers today. How do we make sure that we're all citizens, that we have the means to influence and shape the communities around us? What are those next generation political mechanisms? And how do we challenge all of those worrying trends around inequality, injustice, insecurity? And if we don't start with those big dreams, then my fear is we're not going to make the changes we need. So go brave or go home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. The title of your talk, Be Brave or Go Home, if you look around the room, there's actually not that many that have gone home. And I think the reason they haven't is because they wanted to be here to hear you. And I'm sure they are very pleased that they have. We started our summit yesterday with Katie Love talking about participatory philanthropy, and we've ended with Danny talking about citizen action and how we might, as philanthropists, support citizen action. We're very fortunate, Danny, that we've had you here to bring our conference, if I can use your own terminology, to a climax. Thank you very much for that. I couldn't avoid that, I'm sorry, you started it. It really has been a great way to finish our couple of days. So if I could ask Rongo to come forward and present a small gift on our behalf to show our appreciation.
Kia ora, Danny. What a way to end our summit.
Is this one you wrote?
No, it isn't. Ahakoa ngā uaua, kia kaha, kia toa, kia manawa nui. When you find things difficult in life, stand strong, stand tall, and be of strong heart.
Thank you very much.